John O'Donohue, a poet, has written this. I give thanks for arriving, safety in a new dawn. I give thanks for the gift of eyes to see the world, the gift of mind to feel at home in my life, the wave of possibility breaking on the shore of dawn, the harvest of the past that awaits my hunger, and all the furtherings this new day will bring. Now, when Spinning Wheel was out, I remember dancing up a storm to it. Very near here when I was young, I was a junior at the University of Delaware. It was a year after the Civil Rights Act passed. As a freshman, I arrived in what was almost a uniform consisting of a below-the-knees A-line skirt, Oxford shirt, buttoned on the collar, knee-high socks, and loafers that weren't prescribed but were everywhere on campus. Things have changed. By the time I left the U of D, the Beat generation of poets, the hippie generation, and peace protesters had dramatically changed a few things with their rebellion against American conformity and consumerism. Meanwhile, the struggle for civil rights continued with a focus on housing, education, and economic opportunities. Ironically, the fight for civil rights for African Americans had inspired women to push for an end to gender discrimination, giving rise to the women's liberation movement. Someone who had been a part of that era said that women still were pushed down in the hierarchy of the civil rights movement, and that's what actually inspired them to rise. Those who were on campus during the same years as me will remember the many protests and rallies for peace in Vietnam. In this context, Spinning Wheel can be interpreted as a reflection on the cyclical nature of societal issues and justice. The lyrics, "What goes up must come down," suggests a sense of inevitability and repetition in human struggles. The song's theme of life's constant changes resonated with an audience grappling with the rapid transformation of the era. The analogy of the spinning wheel is warranted today as we observe actions to undo and reverse the gains achieved by both the racial and women's movement. The racial justice and women's movement. The movement toward less economic equity between the wealthiest and the rest of the population only increases and is a symptom of other inequities. In the book Upswing, celebrated political scientist, professor, and author Robert Putnam uses an up and down movement, kind of like a seesaw, to describe the swings. Putnam graphs the distribution of wealth with a look back to the Gilded Age of the late 19th and early 20th century, follows the years to the progressive era from pre-World War II to a new and current Gilded Age, which began in the late 1970s and in the 80s. Putnam argues and documents that the serious imbalance in the distribution of wealth during the Gilded Age of the late 19th and early 20th century was partially mitigated by the reforms of Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. And not coincidentally, during those times was the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in 1919. Unfortunately, he describes the 1920s, as an exception to the period of reform, characterized by a focus on individualism and consumerism. The 20s led to a decline in social capital and civic involvement. Most of us know the outcome of that was the stock market crash of 1929. The Great Depression, which followed, was only ended by Franklin Roosevelt's reforms of the New Deal and by World War II. These reforms of what Putnam describes as the progressive era continued until the late 70s and early 80s. It was beginning in this year that we witnessed the unraveling of civil rights, eventually resulting in the mass incarceration of African Americans, referred to by Michelle Alexander in her book as the new Jim Crow. Actually, that was the title of her book. Despite the progress made by the feminist movement, the 1970s and 80s also saw significant challenges. Now, that was the later 1970s. The backlash against feminist gains, Roe v. Wade, led to efforts which continue to this day to roll back women's reproductive rights. And wouldn't we be in a different position if the Equal Rights Amendment had passed by its supposed deadline in 1982? Putnam wrote that the regression of reforms continues with rising economic inequality, a slowing of social mobility, and increasing wage stagnation. Putnam documents his theses with graphs from careful research. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a graph person. I didn't find the Upswing easy to read, but it was well worth the effort. Putnam's book was published in 2020. We can today certainly add the increasing problem of homelessness and the chaotic race to reverse, or at least to try to reverse, the reforms of the progressive era. Now, I knew, step by step what had been occurring in my adult lifetime, but not that the spinning wheel had brought us to a new gilded age. I remember as a kid watching movies with very old movies, with my mother that included one with the late, great James Cagney about railroad workers trying to unionize. It was bloody. But even when thinking back on it and other similar films, I didn't quite connect those stories with the fight against the unions of today. Of course, now I do. And because I worked so long in the efforts of the coalition to dismantle the new Jim Crow, including during my halftime ministry here with you at UUFN, I was aware of the structural and systemic problems of mass incarceration, which began on the war on drugs in the 70s, Nixon, Still, I was unaware that this kind of regression pre-shadowed and permeated so many, not pre-shadowed, permeated so many of the progressive reforms in our country. I guess you could say that I once was only partially awake, partially woke. Partially woke. That is, woke in the sense of understanding the systemic nature of all the social and economic injustices and how they interact and intersect. And by the way, I'm proud of being more woke today. I'm not trying to be politically correct. I want to know what's going on. Woke is not about what is said to be going on in some fictitious deep state, but what is going on in the dark minds of some leaders. And the systems that they created and create. When has heads up for a wrecking ball ever been more criticized like the term woke is today? A synonym would be aware. And don't you think aware is a good thing? Putnam outlines the issues of today with a multi-factor cause. Rise in conservative politics, deregulation, reduced social welfare, exacerbated income inequality, and undermining the social safety net that disproportionately affects women and marginalized communities. So what are we to do today? Enjoy riding the pony of the carousel until the spinning wheel returns us to a better time? No, of course not. Many UUs are already or were working, many for years upon years, on returning that spinning wheel back to a more progressive era. I would have been at your ACLU meeting yesterday if I didn't have an important memorial service to go to. Robert Putnam describes something extremely interesting when he writes that as our present era deepened into a second Gilded Age, he calls it that, there has been a cultural shift towards individualism and away from collective action that erodes the solidarity of earlier progressive movements. He studied and wrote that the cultural focus has shifted from systematic change to personal empowerment, which I believe, personal empowerment, I believe it's very important. It's just not all that's needed for social movement changes, or at least the work of social movements. Without personal empowerment, we might not have the courage necessary to struggle for benefits and to resist injustice. Yet struggle and resistance are best sustained in communities like yours, struggling and resisting together. Especially if in these communities we are counseled to not let the joy leave us and to deepen our connections in and outside of our community. Without personal empowerment, we may never achieve the state of consciousness that believes we are all part of the same whole, and that what affects each affects us all. Empathy is central to this kind of consciousness. When I was helping inmates understand empathy in the Alternative to Violence Project training in Delaware's prisons, I frequently shared the poem First They Came by Martin Niemöller. Here's the poem. First, they came for communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and today I might add the Palestinians, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew nor a Palestinian. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. As I reflect on this poem, I consider how awful it would be if I were left alone with no one caring if I suffered. I choose to be a person who cares in a community of carers. As a practice towards expanding my awareness and my connections with others, I've been striving to become a being of love. Sometimes maintaining a feeling of love does go awry. For instance, in a monthly meeting of women I entered, sat down, and remained quiet in a conversation, this was recently, of venting about all the things you can guess the earlier arrivals might have been venting about. Finally, the subject changed and the meeting went on for a long while, but something was said and the others returned to venting. And I couldn't take it. I blurted out, I can't handle this. I don't want to become angry. I'm trying to be a being of love, and I just don't want to become angry. I want to feel peace. Well, that was silly. A being of love should certainly become angry without being reactive. At church the Sunday after, this occurred on a Friday, I apologized to each woman who said no apology needed. She understood that I was negatively affected. Afterwards, thinking about it, I remembered a story which those of you who are or were Christian might also remember. It's the story of Jesus' anger in the temple when he upturned the merchandise and threw out the money lenders with a cord he made from a space that was supposed to be sacred. Now, probably no one here would mind driving today's exploiters out of their opportunities, nor cars off the White House property. But if we wish to hold democracy as sacred as Jesus did his temple, then we must be empowered and grow our consciousness to include connections with all types of people. It is so great to expand Try that again. It is so great to expand participation, restoring and expanding just improvements. through collective action, building alliances, and fostering grassroots activism. We can advocate for policy change in the areas we have in common. But we could also form alliances with others whom we don't have so much in common. For instance, religious people that name abortions abhorrent. We could join forces in the realms we share with them, such as assistance and economic improvements for the poor. Our spirituality will sustain us in these efforts, especially contemplative thought, which will companion our hearts, and meditation, which helps our immersion into just being. The latter might take you to the limits of your longings. As Raina Maria Rilke has written, let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. What goes up must come down. So unfortunately, we do have to become aware of and return to more ordinary existence. While doing so, encourage your consciousness to affirm your love and empowerment of self. Encourage your consciousness to expand your love with a focus on our UU values rooted in love. Strive with community and formed connections to become a being of love who affirms the power of love to heal what is broken, to hold people together across pluralities of diverse religious practices and beliefs, to hold us when things fall apart, to grow our capacities, and to guide us as we return again and again to our families, friends, communities, inmost selves, all sources of love's renewal. And if you're wondering if such love can really make a difference, listen to these words from a speech given by Václav Havel, a human symbol of democracy and human rights. Havel, playwright, dissident, prisoner, and former president of the Czech Republic, gave an address to our U.S. Congress in 1990, only a few short months after the fall of the Soviet Union, which had subjugated his country, which was Czechoslovakia at the time, and caused the Czech and Slovak people unimaginable suffering. As he ended the speech, Havel finished with, what I'm trying to say is this: it doesn't have to be merely assistance from the well-educated, powerful, and wealthy to someone who has nothing and therefore has nothing to offer in return. We too can offer something to you, our experience and the knowledge that has come from it. The specific experience I'm talking about has given me one certainty. Consciousness precedes being, and not the other way around, as the Marxists claim, he said. For this reason, the salvation of this human world lies nowhere else than in the human heart, in the human power to reflect, in human meekness, and in human responsibility. Without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better. Nothing will be better for the sphere of our being as humans and the catastrophe towards which this world is headed. I repeat the words of Václav Havel. The salvation of this human world lies nowhere other than in the human heart. May your love expand your heart and your joy. May your energy spin the wheel in the direction of your purpose. Amen. So be it. Blessed be.